On the evening of Tuesday, April 7th, 2026, the world stood at the precipice of a civilizational rupture. Less than 2 hours before a self-imposed 8 p.m. Eastern Time deadline, a deadline punctuated by President Donald Trump's harrowing warning that a whole civilization will die tonight if Tehran did not capitulate, the White House announced a stunning tactical reversal. President Trump has agreed to a 14-day suspension of all destructive force against the Islamic Republic of Iran, effectively pausing the most significant kinetic engagement in the Middle East since the turn of the century. This reprieve did not emerge from the traditional diplomatic corridors of Geneva or Vienna. Instead, it was brokered through the Islamabad Channel, based on urgent, high-stakes negotiations with Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir. The United States has accepted a 14-day ceasefire proposal. The primary condition for this double-sided ceasefire is the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. In a social media statement that rattled global markets, Trump characterized a new 10-point proposal received from Tehran as a workable basis on which to negotiate, claiming that almost all of the various points of past contention have been agreed to. To understand the weight of this pause, one must reconstruct the preceding 5 weeks of devastation. The conflict, dubbed Operation Epic Fury by the Pentagon and Operation Roaring Lion by the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, commenced at 9:45 a.m. IRST on February 28, 2026. In an unprecedented opening salvo of nearly 900 strikes within 12 hours, US and Israeli forces targeted Iran's nuclear facilities, ballistic missile sites, and internal command structures. The most significant outcome of the initial wave was the confirmed death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and several high-ranking members of the Supreme National Security Council. However, the precision of the decapitation strikes was marred by severe collateral damage. A missile strike in the southern town of Minab struck a girls' school adjacent to a naval base, resulting in the deaths of approximately 170 civilians. This incident served as a catalyst for a massive Iranian counter-mobilization. Tehran responded with sustained barrages of thousands of drones and ballistic missiles, striking US assets in Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE, as well as population centers in Israel. By March 4, the Iranian military executed its long-feared Hormuz option, effectively closing the strait. Global shipping traffic, which typically sees 80 commercial crossings daily, plummeted to near zero. Brent crude oil prices, which sat at $70 per barrel in February, surged past $150 by early April. The disruption extended beyond energy. The blockade halted 30% of global urea exports and a third of the world's helium supply, triggering a systemic collapse of the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, economic model. In the United States, gasoline prices spiked by 20% in weeks, creating immense domestic political pressure on the Trump administration to find an off-ramp before a global recession became inevitable. The ceasefire is built upon a 10-point Iranian proposal delivered via Pakistani intermediaries. While the full text remains classified, leaked details suggest a radical departure from previous negotiations. The framework reportedly includes a permanent end to hostilities and a non-aggression pact, the lifting of all US primary and secondary sanctions, recognition of Iran's right to uranium enrichment under revised oversight. The withdrawal of US combat forces from certain regional positions. Continued Iranian coordination of the Strait of Hormuz, a point of significant contention. Compensation for war damages, potentially funded by a toll on shipping transiting the strait, denominated in Chinese yuan. As of April 8th, the conflict has claimed thousands of lives across Iran and Lebanon. Israel's parallel campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon has displaced over 1.5 million people, nearly 1/6 of the country's population. President Trump, maintaining his characteristic transactional rhetoric, asserted on Tuesday that we have already met and exceeded all military objectives. He signaled that the 2-week window is intended to consummate a final agreement that would bring long-term peace to the Middle East. The pause is not a peace treaty. It is a tactical inhalation. From a strategic realist perspective, President Trump's decision to halt the bombing of Iran is not a humanitarian gesture. It is a cold calculation of hegemonic sustainability. The maximum pressure campaign of March 2026 achieved its primary kinetic objectives: the degradation of Iran's nuclear infrastructure and the decapitation of its traditional leadership. But it simultaneously triggered a maximum friction event that the global economy could not absorb. The primary driver of this ceasefire is the Strait of Hormuz. Realism dictates that a superpower's greatest vulnerability is often its own economic foundation. With oil at $150 and the global shipping industry forced into the costly Cape of Good Hope reroute, the United States faced a stagflationary trap that would have eroded Trump's domestic mandate. By demanding the safe opening of the strait as a prerequisite for the pause, Washington is attempting to restore global energy flows without appearing to retreat behind the curtain. The administration realized that while they could destroy Iran's bridges and power plants, they could not easily clear the sea lanes of mines and submersible threats without a protracted, years-long naval commitment. The emergence of Pakistan, led by Prime Minister Sharif and Field Marshal Munir as the central mediator, signals a profound shift in the regional architecture. Pakistan's unique position as a nuclear-armed state, with deep ties to both the US military and the Iranian security apparatus, allowed it to serve as a glorified delivery service that eventually became a strategic bridge. For Islamabad, this is a masterclass in survivalist diplomacy. By positioning themselves as the only entity capable of preventing a civilizational collapse, Pakistan has likely secured significant economic concessions and strategic relevance, balancing its interests between the US and its all-weather friend, China. Trump's insistence on a double-sided ceasefire is a semantic maneuver to grant the new Iranian leadership, likely coalescing around Mojtaba Khamenei or a military council, a face-saving exit. In realist terms, the US has recognized that regime change via total destruction is a messy, unpredictable process that often leaves a power vacuum filled by even more radical elements. By accepting the 10-point proposal as a workable basis, the US is signaling a willingness to accept a chastened republic rather than a collapsed one. We must analyze the strategic inference of the 10-point plan's mention of tolls in Chinese yuan. This is a clear signal of Beijing's shadow over the negotiations. Iran's insistence on yuan-denominated payments for Hormuz transit is a direct assault on the petrodollar's hegemony. If the US accepts any version of this, It acknowledges a multipolar financial reality in the Persian Gulf. China has remained conspicuously quiet throughout the 5-week war, waiting for both sides to exhaust their kinetic energy before stepping in to guarantee the eventual peace. The most volatile variable in this 2-week window is Israel. While a White House official stated that Israel has agreed to the terms, Prime Minister Netanyahu's government faces an existential crisis. If the 14-day pause leads to a deal that recognizes Iranian uranium enrichment, the IDF may view it as a strategic betrayal. Realism suggests that Israel may use this pause to recalibrate for a unilateral strike if the Islamabad talks appear too conciliatory. The ceasefire in Lebanon is equally fragile. Hezbollah's defensive operations are tied strictly to the Iranian theatre. If the Tehran deal falters, the Levant will burn again within hours. Trump's statement that "we have met all objectives" is a classic realist declaration of victory to justify a withdrawal. This reflects a broader trend toward transactional realism, the idea that military force is a tool to be used intensely and briefly to reset the bargaining table, rather than to sustain long-term occupations. The civilization will perish rhetoric was the peak of psychological warfare, intended to force Tehran into the 10-point submission they finally offered. The upcoming Friday summit in Islamabad will be the most critical diplomatic event of the decade. The world should watch two things: the status of the IRGC's coordination in the Strait, and the specific language regarding sanctions relief. If the US grants immediate relief, it confirms that the economic pain of $150 oil was the decisive factor. The 14-day clock is not a countdown to peace, but a test of whether the world's most volatile region can transition from a theatre of war to a market of interests. The bombs have stopped, but the war of nerves has just entered its most lethal phase. Power recognizes power. Trump and the generals in Tehran have realized that total victory is too expensive for either to afford. The Strait of Hormuz remains the ultimate lever of global sovereignty. This has been a deep dive strategic update for Global Report. As the Islamabad summit approaches, the international community remains in a state of strategic suspended animation. Whether this 14-day reprieve marks the birth of a new regional order, or merely a tactical pause before the final storm, depends on the nuances of the 10-point framework. We will continue to monitor the back channels and the sea lanes. I am your senior strategic realist analyst. Knowledge is the only true defense.